What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by Eisner winner, comic writer Ryan North. Welcome to my show.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited. If you are not familiar with Ryan's work, Ryan was creator, writer of the Dinosaur Comics series online, but people probably got to know you also through Avenger Time or Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, or more recently, right now, you are the writer of Fantastic Four for Marvel. Man, I'm excited to talk about comics with you. Look at that. It's so good. So good. Do you have just a lot of knickknacks of different characters and stuff that you've gotten to write now all around your desk and things? Yes, you
Yeah,
do.
there's a there's a set that Marvel makes of these little action figures. They're throwback little tiny ones, and I like them mainly because of how cruddy they are. Like they're just they don't do anything. There's no actions. There's no interchangeable hands. They're just like figures. Reed Richards, he's just a guy. He doesn't stretch. He's just a normal guy. Invisible Woman, she's fully visible. Just a woman. It's great.
It's so
They really
good.
inspire me.
That's where you get your motivation for writing. I love it.
Yeah.
Before we hop into talking a lot about Fantastic Four, I always like to start out with, did you grow up like getting reading comics, or how did you kind of fall into this world?
Yeah, I did not. I grew up in a small village outside of Ottawa, Canada, called Osgood, and I was born in 1980, so that's 43 years ago now. Um, so growing up, there was no internet, and there were no comic book stores that I could stick my head in, besides one in Ottawa, and that was half an hour away, and I was 6, and so I didn't really. I had this vague idea that I liked comic characters like Batman, Superman, just through like cultural osmosis. And I liked the Batman cartoon when I was a little bit older.
Yeah.
Um, and so what happened was when I got a job out of high school, I had a car with my first paycheck. I walked into a comic book store in Ottawa and just bought 3 comics at random off the shelf, 3 trade paperbacks. And 2 of them were great. And I was like, man, these are pretty good odds. 2 out of 3 is not bad.
Yeah. Do you
And
remember what
so
they were?
yeah, I do. The first, and this is random. I didn't ask anyone to talk to anyone. I just grabbed comics. The first was Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller, Lynn Varley, and the second was Superman: Peace on Earth by Paul Dini and Alex Ross, which is like a picture book story about Superman trying to solve world hunger. And both those books sort of blew my hat off because it's like, man, these are doing stuff that I didn't think I'd never seen comics do before because I haven't read any comics before, but like they both showed the breadth of the medium in these wildly different dimensions. And it's so exciting to find a new medium. And also, as a writer, it's so exciting to work in a medium that is so young, where we don't know where the limits are. We don't know where the walls are, the places where you're not supposed to go. And you can't really say that of novels, right? Like we know what the written word can do pretty well. We've been around it for a long time. We don't have those similar restrictions with comics.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the medium is that it's still surprising and you can see stuff done with it that you've never seen done before.
So where do you go then as a comic reader from you started right off the bat with Dark Knight Returns, and then like did you continue, like, I mean, 2 out of 3 without asking anybody is pretty good odds. Did you continue just
Yeah,
randomly picking up comic books as you went on, and kind of what
I
inspired you
did.
moving on writing and
Yeah, I picked up a lot of stuff. I randomly started to find authors that I liked. Eddie Campbell is a great cartoonist, so I discovered early on. I was like, man, this guy is doing autobiographical, semi-fictionalized autobiography, and then he did From Hell with Alan Moore, which leads you into that sort of not quite self-published but indie-published comics doing historical fiction and historical fact. And I really circled around superheroes, but didn't get that into them for a while, besides Batman, because I always like Batman. But I couldn't tell you when I first read a Spider-Man comic or a Fantastic Four comic or, a Green Lantern comic or Green Arrow, but it was a while later. And so I really got into it through the realm of indie and self-published and zines and that whole space, which is it can be very experimental. And that was what appeals to me and still appeals to me, is that this medium is young, like I've been saying.
yeah. Well, and you can walk into a comic shop, and even if you are, you've read all the comics you think you can find an independent comic and like be blown away that you've never gotten a chance to read it. It's such a vast
Yeah.
medium.
Yeah,
It's so
and
cool.
better these days, you can even do it in bookstores. You don't need a specialty store necessarily. I remember
Yeah.
Michael Kupperman is a great cartoonist. I found his book, Snake and Bacon, at random in a little indie store, bookstore in Toronto. And again, you're like, wow, this is great. I love this. I've got a new author that I love. It's terrific.
So you kind of discovered the medium later in life. Did were you always drawn to writing, or where did this kind of idea come about where you're like, I want to start creating?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can tell you, I remember being in last year of high school in Ontario at the time was grade 13, OAC it was called. And I was applying to university for my undergrad. And I was really torn between wanting to study the humanities and wanting to study computer science because I like them both and I still like them both. And I ended up doing computer science, thinking I could always write in my spare time. And that's kind of the thing you tell yourself, like, oh, I'll do that in my spare time. But I thought it's easier to write in my spare time than study computers in my spare time. So I did computer science. And then in my last year of undergrad, I took this course about being, as part of the course, we had to start a business online just for the course, just for the semester. And we are divided into groups, class divided into thirds, and my group had done nothing after a month. And I was like, this is bad. I don't want to fail this course. And so I had control of the domain name we were assigned, and I put up comics I'd made that weekend with the same pictures, different words, called the Dinosaur Comics. And that was 23 years ago. I'm still doing it now. And so I kind of slid into it sideways. And then during my grad degree, I did write these comics in my spare time every day, comic every day. And I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the community around it. And webcomics was obviously younger than it is now, but it was still very young. And then when I finished grad school, I faced a choice, right? Like, what are you doing now? You're out of school.
Yeah.
Finally out of school. You're 23 years old, 24, 25. I guess it's maybe 26. I forget when I graduated. Anyway, what do you do now? And I could work as a computational linguist, which is what I studied, or I could become a full-time cartoonist. And become a full-time cartoonist, all I had to do was fail to get a job, which is really easy. And so I sort of slid into this. There was no big moment of quitting your day job because I just never got a day job. So I kind of walked into it sideways in that sense.
So your advice to young aspiring creators is just don't get a job and just keep writing.
I mean, my sincere advice is to put your work online where people can see it. Because Dinosaur Comics is kind of an aggressive aesthetic. It's the same pictures, different words. It can maybe be visually repetitive. And I often think that if I had not put those comics online, but had just, I don't know, wallpapered my house with them instead, I would look like a crazy person. Or this giant stack of 4,000 variations on the same comic with the same pictures. That's something a crazy person does. But you put it online, that's something that can build a career on. So it's there is value in putting your work where people can see it for sure.
And then, so where was that transition? So you started Dinosaur Comics, 23 years ago, and still working out, which is fantastic. To then start to get into, maybe more physical medium of comic aspect.
So here's where I got more bad advice too, because what I did, here's the Ryan technique to do this. You start your comic, and then you do that webcomic for a full decade plus. And in that time, one of your readers who started reading it in high school can graduate and go all the way through university and graduate and enter the workforce and get a job at a comic book company. And then when they get the license to Adventure Time, they say, hey, maybe the Dinosaur Comics guy wants to write this. I'll drop him a line. So the short version story is, I broke into print comics by writing back to an email saying, do you want to write a print comic, with yes. But the more honest version is I'd been writing for a decade at that point, and I was in a position where people would ask me to do that, which is, great and super fun. But it's also, if your goal is to write print comics for somebody else, to write for places like Boom or Marvel or DC or IDW or others, there are faster ways to do it than to do a webcomic for 10 years, but that was never my goal. Like, my goal was, I was happy doing this webcomic. And I thought I was doing my fun talking dinosaur comic with jokes every day. What I didn't realize was, yes, is what I'm doing, but I was also effectively doing a long form visual comic resume of here's the type of stories Ryan likes to tell. Here's his sense of humor. Here's him meeting a deadline, especially a self-imposed deadline, which are the hardest ones to meet, and all the stuff that you get sort of for free by putting the work in to make your own stuff. And this is what editors say all the time at the big two, saying like, you know, your first job is not going to be writing Spider-Man. Your first job should be something that you care about to prove that you can do this. And then when we see it and we love it, we'll be like, oh, let's hire this guy to do some stuff for us. So I stumbled into it again sideways, not knowing
But
what I was doing, but enjoying it.
It goes back to what you were saying of putting yourself out there, putting yourself online, and building that audience, getting people to see and have that repertoire. So you did Adventure Time, and then I know you did other stuff throughout there, but then kind of the big foray into the big two was Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then that went on for what, 50 issues, right?
5 years, 58, because we rebooted. We had 2 number ones in the first year.
Wow.
Not a reboot. The Marvel Universe reset to a certain extent at that point, and we had just started, so we just basically ignored it, but used it as an excuse for new number one to jump ahead a few months in time.
Yeah.
It was fun because when we were at the end of the run, issue 50 was actually issue 58 because we'd done the first 8 issues, and so we had 2 issue 50s in our last year. Comics numbering is extremely logical.
Yes, it is. Well, you get to. What I've loved about it, I got to know you through Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, and then obviously Fantastic Four, and they're different stories, but you still have your sense. You have a strong sense of humor in Squirrel Girl that you still see through the dialogue and stuff of Fantastic Four. Do you, as a writer though, how do you switch kind of gears of storytelling? Because Unbeatable Squirrel Girl is, you have the little the little notes at the bottom of where you interject stuff and things like that. And do you have to switch your mindset a little bit more for when you get into certain areas or camps of something for writing?
Yeah, I was worried about it initially because Squirrel Girl is at its heart a comedy book. It's also a book about a remarkable young woman who's smart and empathic and clever and good at computers and all the stuff that's Doreen Green, the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. But it was conceived of as a fun book with jokes, a funny book, a comedy book. And every time I'm not writing comedy, I was always worried that this is going to be bad, because in comedy, when you're doing it well, because your body gives you a reaction. The only way I know how to write jokes is to try to make myself laugh, which is why I write alone where no one can see me, because it's really embarrassing to be there chuckling at your own joke while you type. And I think it's one of the only 2 genres where that's true. Comedy, your body tells you you're doing it well. And I imagine erotica, you have the same thing. We're like, oh, this is working for me. Okay, if anyone shares my interests, this will work for them too. But it's not the same with drama. There's no drama organ that goes off. And so I was worried. And then I saw I was going to say I was talking to my friend Chip, but I wasn't. I saw an interview with Chip Zdarsky where he was talking not to me. And he mentioned how he can write a funny joke and get 80% of people to laugh when they read it. No, that's not true. He said he can write a funny joke and get 20% of people to laugh when he reads it. Because it's hard. Comedy is hard. But he can write a sad scene and get 80% of people to cry when they read it. He's like, yeah, drama is easier than comedy. And I was like, what? I've been doing this on hard mode the whole time. And so it helped me sort of get the confidence in that you can kind of tell when you're doing something well, even if it's not comedy, because you read it yourself. You're your own first reader. And if it makes you feel something, if you can hear the characters and you're like, yes, this rings true, you're doing it well, in my opinion. And so it's a bit of a shift, but also Johnny Storm is a funny guy. He's great. And you get a bit of the comedy flavor with him that is already there in Squirrel Girl.
Yeah. So you came into comics later in life, you said, and how do you then, as a writer, prepare for something like a Fantastic Four or Squirrel Girl? How much research do you do? How much reading of past stuff do you do to kind of get this world that's created, so that way you can start to tell your story that you want to tell in that world?
Yeah, with Squirrel Girl it was easy. I read every single Squirrel Girl comic that ever made, and there were like 12. So I read them. It's like, great, I've got this.
Easy.
It gave me a good handle on not necessarily who she was, but who I wanted her to be in that sense. Like I
Mhm.
saw a lot of unmolded clay there. With Fantastic Four, that book has been in almost constant publication since 20, 30 years before I was born. And that I could not reasonably read all of that. And I say that knowing that I think Hickman said he read every Fantastic Four comic before he started his run. Uh, Making the rest of us look bad because I didn't. I read as much as I could. I read the first 60, 100 issues, and then jumped ahead and would read a bunch of issues from different runs to get a sense of the flavor. I'd pick up all the major stories, look at what the stories people are still talking about, like trying to get as much as the breadth of it as you can. But I do find at a certain point, it's very much diminishing returns because initially you're trying to figure out who these people are, what do they sound like, how they interact with each other. And once you do that, you start having the characters develop in your head, and you kind of have a sense of who Sue Storm is, who Johnny Storm is, who Ben Grimm is, who Reed Richards is. And the new comics you're reading aren't adding much to that. The value there is it lets you call back to major events like, oh, remember this comic from Fantastic Four 436? We can reference that because I've read it and understood it. But it's less useful in discovering the characters. So basically, as soon as I start itching, like I want to write these people because I got a handle. I want to see what comes out. That's a point where I'll start doing that and not reading every single issue at that point. I'd like to, like, as I'm not saying these issues are not worth reading. I'm saying there's only so many hours in the day, and this is an incredibly long running work of fiction tossed between hundreds of creative people over literal decades. And there are people who have read every single Fantastic Four comic ever published as it was published. And these people who are going to be reading your book. So you can't skip the research in that sense.
Yeah.
Like you need to stand beside Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and John Byrne and Hickman and everyone else and not embarrass yourself. So it's a challenge for sure. And it's terrifying. Absolutely. I forgot what the question was, and now I'm talking about how scary.
No, you got it. I asked how much research goes into it, because I don't think we as readers know kind of sometimes, like, as you as a creator get pitched an idea like, hey, do you want to write this? Like, where's that window then for you to go, okay, before, like, how quick do you have to say accept to then be like, oh, let me see if I know a little bit more of this world, or like, so.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you my experience with Squirrel Girl. I got an email, I think it was on Friday, from my editor, Will Moss, saying, if you had a picture of Squirrel Girl, what would it look like? And I was like, Squirrel Girl, isn't she the one who talks to squirrels? And I took the weekend and I read all about her. I read all 12 issues or whatever it was, and was thinking about her. And by the end of that weekend, I knew, like, I really wanted it to be a Squirrel Girl comic. And I really wanted to be the guy who was writing it. So that was clean and quick. With Fantastic Four, I got an email from editor Tom Brevoort, and he was saying, look, we're doing a new run of Fantastic Four. We'd love to have some ideas from you. And full disclosure, this is a bake-off. So I'm sending this to a bunch of other writers to see what ideas they have, and I'm going to pick the one I like the most. And I really appreciate that, because sometimes they don't tell you when it's a bake-off, and you feel like, why did I put all this work into this if it wasn't going to happen?
Right.
But knowing that it was in that context, I was like, all right, so here's, a couple pages off the top of my head. And Tom wrote back, was like, all right, there's some stuff here. Explore this a bit more. And I wrote back with some clarifications, revisions. And he wrote back being like, yeah, there's some cool stuff here. Give me some more. And so I sent a third draft. And he was like, yeah, there's some neat stuff. Let's talk more of this. And I was like, Tom, do I have the job for that? He's like, oh, yeah, no, you have the job. I should have told you a while back. Sorry, I thought I told you. And I was like, no, you didn't. I thought this was like a multi-round bake-off that I was just being.
How many rounds of this bake-off do I?
Yeah, I was like, how much longer are we doing this, Tom? But the process there, in the first issue that I did, Fantastic Four #1, there's a bit at the back talking about the 4 pillars I thought belonged to this comic. And that was there in the pitch talk, me saying, look, this is what I think the comic is. This is how I would write it. The Fantastic Four can do anything. Fantastic Four are accessible. Like all these pillars of what the comic was, I wanted the comic to be, were just there in the document. And that document talked about a time loop. It talked about a town full of doombots, and it talked about all the stuff that stories I haven't done. Where I was like, this might be an idea. I don't know. I'll throw it in, but I haven't liked it. So it's nothing's locked in stone, but you're basically trying to find a path forward that makes sense for you. And I knew that Dan Slott had just finished his great run in the book, and he had gone huge. He had like battles for the fate of the universe, and I was like, I'm never going to go as big as that. I'm not going to top what Dan Slott did here in terms of scope. Like that's impossible. He has gone so huge that the only answer is to go smaller and tell these smaller standalone stories. Not in the sense of like they're better, but in the sense of, well, this hasn't been done for a while. So I might have a little bit of wiggle room here to do something.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've appreciated about this Fantastic Four run, and being completely honest, I have not read a lot of Fantastic Four myself. So it was one of those, I want to hop in, and I've loved everything about it. And one of the things I appreciate is it seems like you have an overarching idea of kind of like where you want to go with some of the story, but then you have a lot of 1 to 2 issue arcs throughout this, 18 issue run right now. Cause at the time,
19 as of tomorrow.
Yeah. It comes out tomorrow. So like, where is it for you as a writer to say, like, you have this overarching scope of where you want to take things, but then like you're throwing out, like you said, you had issue 2, you had like Doombot Town, and then you got dinosaurs for 2 issues, and you've got all these different like it's crazy. It's awesome. I love it.
Thank you. I mean, I pitched the book I wanted to read, which was I would want to read a Fantastic Four book that has a lot of big ideas, and we don't need to spend 6 months on each of them. Like, that sounds awesome to me. A new big idea every month. Sign me up. That's awesome. I pranked myself because then I realized I had to write this book, and it's hard. And Squirrel Girl, I would do these 4-issue arcs and 1-issue standalones, and a 4-issue arc and 1-issue standalone, and that meant I had to think of a new story every 4 months. That was fine. Fantastic Four, it's a new story, a new sci-fi premise every month, has to fit in 20 pages, has to star probably up to 9 characters. We got the 5 main characters plus their 4 kids. You've got to have a twist. You've got to have some emotional realization. You've got to have some coming together and break apart. Like there's a lot to cram into there, and it's not easy to think of something new every month, but it's also really fun. And I've been really enjoying the challenge. I thought it was impossible initially. I was like, what have I done? This is ridiculous. I need to stop. And then I was reading a biography of Kurt Vonnegut. He was talking about writing sci-fi stories when he was, in the golden age of sci-fi coming up. And there were all these magazines who would buy science fiction comics or science fiction stories, prose stories. And he would try to sell new stories every month. And I was like, oh, this is just what they were doing. Like these people are writing stories every month and trying to sell them. And I'm in this lucky position where I get to write a sci-fi story every month. And I have a publisher lined up who's waiting for it, who demands a new story every month. So in that context, it's like, oh, this is not impossible. This is just what people did when you could sell source stories like this. So it's been a lot of fun to sort of imagine myself as a writer in the 40s, 30s, 50s, trying to think of a new story that I can make every month, with the benefit of then it gets drawn by these amazing artists, and then Alex Ross does a cover for it, and all this stuff that sort of comes along with it is really cool.
How has that kind of come full circle? You said one of the first books you picked up was Alex Ross artwork.
It was.
And now he's doing the main covers. Like that alone, like if you're not even reading your book for your stuff, like to see those covers each month.
I hadn't made that connection until you said just now that like he was on the cover. He did the art for one of the first 2 comics I read. And now every month I send him some ideas for a cover and he paints it, which is wild. Yeah, that is a full circle moment for sure.
Yeah. They're breathtaking to see. Like Alex Ross is a master of the craft. And so you have, and like you said, you have new teams each time. And one of the things I've appreciated, like you said, you're telling these, 1 issue, maybe sometimes it's 2 issue sci-fi stories. I have had people sometimes say to me, like, I struggle. I can't get into one of these long runs because
where do I start?
I'm like, literally pick up an issue of Fantastic Four. You'll get the gist of, if there's a running story behind it, you'll pick it up really quick and you'll be right in there. So I think that's refreshing as a comic reader that, the art form is beautiful. You can do multiple. There's nothing knocking the long form of a 5-issue arc, but there is something cool that, like, in this day and age, one of your trades is going to have three different sci-fi stories in the midst of just one trade.
Yeah, and that's by design. I can tell you the first comic I ever read, and this is before I got my job. One year at Christmas, Santa put a Wonder Woman comic in my stocking. I have no idea where he got it, but it was a Wonder Woman comic. It was part like 3 of 7. It was completely inscrutable. I had no idea what was happening. And it was, I bounced off it. Like there's nothing there to hook onto. And part of the fun and part of the challenge of writing Fantastic Four in these little stories is that it does make any book a jumping off point. It also makes it a jumping off point. If the comic's not good, you won't pick up the next one. So it's kind of doing it on hard mode, right? Like, oh, I'll buy the next 5 minutes of the story. It's like, no, next week or next month is something completely different. The issue coming out this month is a noir story. That's not what we've done before. But if you do it well, and if you're lucky, it gets you an audience that wants that is willing to see something new every month. And for me, the reason I conceived of it that way is that like I said, Fantastic Four is a comic that's been running since the 60s with one brief interruption recently, nonstop. And you can't expect someone who's curious about Fantastic Four to start with Fantastic Four #1 back in 1961 and read them all until he gets to something new, because those comics are of a different time and they speak to a different audience, and they're still good and they're still fascinating and they still tell great stories, but there's a barrier there that wasn't there when they were published. And my thought was, if you're doing a new series of Fantastic Four, like, let's make it so that you can pick it up and not feel like you're lost and not feel like you needed to go do several decades worth of homework to catch up. Like, there's nothing wrong with the characters. There's nothing wrong with the premise. It's super cool. Let's have fun with it.
What I love is, because I hope you stay on Fantastic Four for a while, but I'm excited for your next series, because literally you're like, oh, I'm doing it on hard mode with a Squirrel Girl by doing comedy. Let's do a drama. You know what? Let's make it hard mode though by doing a different concept every.
I didn't realize it was too late.
Let's just see what you do for hard mode the next.
Yeah, I did prank myself.
Do you have like as a writer, do you process stuff into like a folder of ideas that you're like, this might work for a story sometime, or is it just kind of, if it comes in the process of writing, you go with it?
Little both.
Okay.
For Dinosaur Comics, I do have sort of a giant text file with snippets of dialogue or little bits of ideas I might want to explore. For Fantastic Four, I've got a couple documents that are just like premises. Some of them get used, some of them don't get used. There was one that had the state of a small town that has like a hole, like a garbage pit. And the gag was, anything you threw in the pit, you would forget about entirely. It would just be erase your memory. And I kept not being able to find a way to get that story to work, but it became the idea of them, 2 stories. The first was the one where people were disappearing with the Zalgor, and the second was the Fantastic Four losing language with the Doom anniversary issue. And that was like 2 elements of that idea of like forgetfulness that I got by just, going for walks and turning the idea over in my head for a while. So it's a bit of both. I've also been reading a lot of classic sci-fi from the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s, where it's just like short stories. They've got an idea, they explore the idea, and you're out. And a lot of them are no good, but some of them are the best things I've ever read. And it's just like short sci-fi stories. If I'm going to write them, I should be reading some more of them.
For sure. Well, Ryan, I want to respect your time. I feel like I could talk to you about comics forever. Is there anything that you've worked on or that you're working on that we haven't gotten to touch on that you'd like to just note?
I mean, I would be remiss if I did mention I have a new book out with Erica Henderson, my Squirrel Girl partner, called Danger and Other Unknown Risks, which is about a young girl in a post-apocalyptic future setting off to save the world, but it's got some twists. That's a graphic novel that is out now at better bookstores near you.
Fantastic. Yeah, and that team up on Squirrel Girl was fantastic. The art and your paired with your writing you all knocked it out of the park.
It really makes me respect the work that, not that I did not write, but the work that editors do in casting a book like that, because it's happened to me every time, like Braden and Shelley on Adventure Time, and then Erica and Derek and Squirrel Girl. I know logically and objectively, they are trying to get people to make a comic, but it's been like this friendship blind dating service. Like I didn't know these people, and now we're buds, and we got to do this work together because we were asked to. It's one of the advantages, I think, of doing freelance in this way is you get to meet people and work with them that you would have otherwise never met.
Yeah,
and become pals.
absolutely. Well, Ryan, where can people follow along with you? What you're working on? What you got coming up? Where's the best way for people to stay connected?
Oh gosh, are there good sites left on the internet? You can find me. I have a personal website that's ryannorth.ca. I have a BlueSky account that's also ryannorth.ca. I try not to post on Twitter for a myriad of reasons, but I do go on there to retweet or post like more here's new stuff things. I'm trying to weed myself off it, but it's not great.
Yeah. So, well, Ryan, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about comics. Gang, all the links that were just mentioned will be in the description of the video, or if you're listening to via podcast and the description notes there. Check out Fantastic Four. If you're not, like I said, y'all can pick up the issue we're recording it.
Any issue.
And
any issue will
new
work.
one's dropping tomorrow. And like you said, we haven't dealt with Fantastic Four in our world yet. And bam, now we're getting it. So pick up any issue of Fantastic Four that Ryan's been working on. I think you're going to hop in. And if you don't like it, guess what? Just give it an issue and then you get a whole nother type of story.
Next month there's something new.
It's a beautiful thing. So
yeah.
Ryan, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about comics with me.
That was my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And thanks for the thoughtful questions too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. With that being said, gang, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.